Every year in college sports, the spotlight shines on a handful of names. The Heisman candidates, the March Madness heroes, the viral highlight reels that get replayed on ESPN. But here's the truth. For every Zion Williamson or Trevor Lawrence, there are players who put up jaw-dropping numbers, carried their teams, and etched their names into record books, only to be overlooked by the national media. And sometimes those overlooked names turn out to be legends in disguise. The kind of athletes who break records, dominate their competition, but never get the recognition they deserve until it's far too late. Today we're diving into the most underrated college athletes of the last decade. Not just the stars you forgot, but the ones who rewrote history without ever being treated like superstars. Stick around, because by the time we get to number 1, you'll wonder how the sports world missed it. Now, before we get into the list, let's make one thing clear. What does underrated actually mean? For this video, we looked at 3 things. First, production. Did the athlete dominate statistically or achieve something historic? Second, recognition. Did they get the same national attention as players with similar numbers? And third, context. Were they overlooked because of the conference they played in, their school's market size, or even draft bias that ignored their success? So with that said, let's jump into the list. And trust me, number 7 might be the best, you won't believe this stat moment of the entire video. If you've never heard of Mike Daum, that's exactly the problem. Because while he was at South Dakota State, Daum quietly became one of the most prolific scorers in college basketball history. We're talking more than 3,000 career points. To put that in perspective, he scored more points than Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and even Larry Bird did in college. Daum won 3 consecutive Summit League Player of the Year awards and led his team to 3 NCAA tournaments. Yet because he played in the Summit League, his highlights rarely made national television. No flashy ESPN packages, no top draft buzz, just consistent domination against anyone who lined up across from him. If Daum had worn a Kentucky or Duke jersey, he would have been a household name. Instead, he became the Dominator in South Dakota, a legend hidden away from the national spotlight. And this is just the start of our list. Number 2, Fletcher Magee. Next up is the sharpshooter who should have been remembered as one of the greatest three-point artists the college game has ever seen. Fletcher Magee from Wofford didn't just make a lot of threes. He made more than anyone in Division I history. By the time he finished his career, Magee had knocked down 509 threes. That's a record that still stands today. And it wasn't just volume. His shooting percentage was elite. He carried Wofford to multiple NCAA tournaments, even pulling off upsets against power schools. Yet outside of a few viral March Madness moments, Magee was rarely talked about in the same breath as guys like JJ Redick or Buddy Hield. Think about it. The NCAA's all-time three-point leader, and hardly anyone outside hardcore fans remembers his name. That is the definition of underrated. And if you think that's wild, wait until you see what number 3 did. Number 3, Ethan Happ, Wisconsin. Wisconsin basketball has had its share of stars, but Ethan Happ deserves more credit than he ever got. Happ finished his career with over 2,000 points, more than 1,200 rebounds, and nearly 500 assists. He was one of only a handful of players in NCAA history to reach those marks. But because Happ wasn't a flashy dunker or a three-point shooter, his fundamental excellence got buried in the background. He was a master of footwork, a defensive anchor, and a walking double-double in the Big Ten. Yet he never got the national superstar label. Teammates and coaches raved about how irreplaceable he was, but the media spotlight rarely left the blue blood schools. If you watched Wisconsin play during those years, you knew Happ was the backbone. But for casual fans, his name hardly ever came up, which is exactly why he belongs on this list. Number 4, Fred VanVleet, Wichita State. Everyone knows Fred VanVleet now, the NBA champion with the Toronto Raptors. But rewind to his college days at Wichita State, and the story is completely different. VanVleet was the heart and soul of the Shockers. He led Wichita State to a Final Four, multiple deep tournament runs, and racked up school records in assists and steals. He was the definition of a floor general, orchestrating one of the most efficient offenses in the country. And yet, despite all that, Van Vliet went undrafted in 2016. That's right. A Final Four point guard with elite numbers and leadership pedigree, completely ignored on draft night. Scouts doubted his size, his athleticism, his ceiling. Looking back, that decision looks ridiculous. But it also proves just how underrated Van Vliet was during his college years. He was a proven winner long before the NBA noticed. And our next athlete has a very similar story. Number 5, Anthony Lamb, Vermont. Anthony Lamb was a powerhouse at Vermont. He could score inside, stretch the floor, and carried the Catamounts to America East dominance. In 2019, he won the America East Player of the Year and even dropped 42 points in a single game. But because he played in a small conference, his dominance barely registered on the national stage. When Vermont upset Syracuse in the NCAA tournament, it was treated like a fluke, not the result of Lamb's consistency and skill. Despite being one of the best mid-major players of his era, Lamb was overlooked in national awards and had to claw his way into professional basketball opportunities. His story is another reminder that geography matters in college sports. Play for Vermont, and you might be invisible. Play for Duke, and the world knows your name. Lamb deserved so much more recognition than he got. Number 6. Miye Oni, Yale. How often do you hear about NBA draft picks coming from the Ivy League? Exactly. That's what makes Miye Oni's college career so underrated. At Yale, Oni was the 2019 Ivy League Player of the Year. He averaged nearly 18 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. His size, versatility, and shooting ability made him a clear NBA prospect. Yet because he played in the Ivy League, his rise went almost completely unnoticed until draft scouts finally caught on. Oni became the first Ivy League player drafted in the modern era, but even then his story was treated like trivia rather than an achievement. The truth is, Oni dominated at Yale, proved himself against higher competition, and still didn't get the attention he deserved. If anything, he's proof that talent can come from anywhere, even conferences that people usually dismiss as too academic. Number 7. Tacko Fall, UCF. You've probably seen Tacko Fall's name because of his incredible size. At 7 feet 6, he was one of the tallest players to ever step on a college court. But what often gets missed is just how effective he was at UCF. Fall led the NCAA in field goal percentage multiple times, anchored one of the toughest defenses in the AAC, and nearly led UCF to a historic upset of Duke in the 2019 NCAA tournament. He wasn't just a novelty because of his height. He was an efficient, dominant rim protector who changed the way teams game planned. Yet, he was treated more like a sideshow than a legitimate star. His name generated curiosity, but not respect. And that's unfair because by the numbers, Tacko Fall was one of the most efficient players of his entire era. And if you think Tacko's story is underrated, wait until you hear about number 8. Number 8, Jared Verse, Albany/Florida State. Jared Verse is a perfect example of how overlooked talent can rise to the top. Coming out of high school, he was barely recruited. He landed at the University at Albany, an FCS school far away from the glitz of the SEC or ACC. At Albany, he was unstoppable. Verse racked up sacks, forced fumbles, and terrorized offensive lines. Eventually, Florida State noticed, and when he transferred there, he immediately became one of the best defensive linemen in the country. By 2023, he was projected as a first-round NFL pick. But here's the catch. For years, nobody paid him any attention. He wasn't a 4-star recruit. He wasn't even on ESPN's radar. His rise proves just how many players are overlooked in the recruiting process. Verse went from invisible to unavoidable, and his story reminds us that sometimes the best athletes start at the bottom. Number 9, Cooper Kupp, Eastern Washington. Before he was a Super Bowl MVP, Cooper Kupp was just another wide receiver at a small FCS school. But the numbers he put up at Eastern Washington were jaw-dropping. Kupp set FCS records for career receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. He even won the Walter Payton Award, given to the best defensive player in FCS football. And still, he was practically invisible to most fans. Analysts dismissed his stats because they came at the FCS level. Scouts said his competition wasn't good enough. His draft buzz was lukewarm at best. It wasn't until he exploded in the NFL that people realized how great he really was. But the truth is, Cooper Kupp was already legendary in college. He just didn't get the attention. That's what makes him one of the most underrated college athletes of the entire decade. Number 10 wildcard, Johnell Davis. To wrap up our list, let's look at a more recent name, Johnell Davis from Florida Atlantic. In 2023, he led FAU to an improbable Final Four run, putting up clutch shots and playing fearless basketball against blue blood programs. Davis was the first player in NCAA tournament history to record at least 25 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, and 5 steals in a single game. That's historic. Yet outside of March Madness diehards, his name quickly faded from the headlines. The truth is, Davis showcased the kind of all-around game that deserves national recognition. But because FAU isn't a traditional basketball powerhouse, his story was treated as a Cinderella moment instead of a sign of elite talent. If Davis continues to shine, history might remember him better. But for now, he's exactly the kind of player this list was made for. So, what do all these athletes have in common? They dominated. They shattered records. They carried programs on their backs. But because they weren't in the right conference, didn't have the hype machine behind them, or didn't fit the mold of a highlight star, their greatness flew under the radar. Being underrated doesn't mean they weren't great. It means we failed to recognize their greatness in real time. And if anything, this list should make you think twice the next time a mid-major guard or an FCS receiver starts putting up insane numbers. Because chances are, you might just be watching the next Cooper Kupp or Fred VanVleet before the world catches on. Now, I want to hear from you. Who do you think is the most underrated college athlete of the last decade? Drop your picks in the comments and don't forget to hit